Tiago Forte, welcome to the Nonprofit Productivity Summit. We are thrilled to have you, and I know that you have an incredible background in terms of the nonprofit space. And before we get into the more formal questions, I'd love for you to comment on, your experience in the nonprofit world.
Yeah, so happy to be here, Mike. Thanks for the invitation. I It piqued my curiosity, my interest when I saw your email, land in my inbox, because I spent most of my 20s and really the whole first part of my, I guess you could call it my career, um, in some combination of teaching, volunteering, government service in the Peace Corps. I taught English overseas. I worked for a microfinance nonprofit in Colombia, volunteered for various schools and nonprofits in Latin America, served in the Peace Corps in Eastern Ukraine. I didn't get my first nonprofit job, so my first sort of normal job, until I was like 26 or 27. And so I feel like I was really educated in how to be a professional and how to produce results and how to secure resources and funding and how to collaborate across many different organizations and how to serve people. I think that era really gave me the attitude that work is service, business is service. The reason that we do what we do, or at least the reason I do what I do, is to serve. Even though I'm now in a for-profit business, I thank the nonprofit world for all of that. I just gained so many skills, learned so many things from the world of people trying to do good in the world.
And sometimes nonprofit leaders will tell me, boy, the grass is greener on the other side. I can't wait to get to the for-profit space. And I often say, well, the grass still needs to be mowed. It's all hard. And to your point, it's all service. And I think that, a beautiful expression of that is your new book, Building a Second Brain. And it's a tremendous resource. I remember the days of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I remember my first copy of David Allen's Getting Things Done. And I kind of feel like this is a new moment where building a second brain is a new chapter of productivity. And I'm wondering, why do you think it's struck such a chord with so many people?
Yeah, I mean, I would love for it to join that pantheon of greats. That's my goal. That is what I'm working toward. I think you're right. It's definitely surpassed any expectation I ever had. Back in the beginning, I was just blogging about my first blog post was a sort of personal rant against tagging, like just so niche and so nerdy. I never imagined anyone even thought about this kind of stuff. And from that first thing I wrote all the way to today, every step of the way, the response to what I've put out there has just so far exceeded what I expected. But I do think after all these years, I can kind of see that this is a new chapter. It's a new era. There's a number of reasons for that. A few off the top of my head are technology, even getting things done, which is sort of the immediately preceding era, the last 20 years or so. He could write that book in 2001 and sort of ignore the technology, say like, oh, you can do this in software, but you'll have to figure that out yourself, or you can do it just as well on paper. That was like the last year, 5, 6 years before the iPhone, you could get away with that. These days, if you're not using software, you are massively under leveraged. It's not good enough to do it on paper. It's not good enough to do it analog. You have to use software. The leverage is just something you can't deny. Um, I think that's one big thing. And then another big thing I'd highlight is just the information overload problem, which we've been hearing about for 20 years and for decades, even before that, in different forms, has now reached this level where it's like a mental health crisis. It is a civilization level, humanity, almost humanity threatening crisis. Our attention is just being fragmented into pieces, just shattered. Our communities are being degraded. Our relationships are suffering because we are addicted. And usually the criticism falls on, oh, this particular social media platform, it's their fault, or this kind of device, it's fault. It's not. It's the environment. If it wasn't one app, it would be another. If it wasn't your smartphone, it would be something else. It is the pervasive amount of information which leads to a pervasive sense of anxiety and stress that is causing this. Now, where I differ is, sure, there's some negative impacts of all of that, but I say we kind of have to just embrace it. I'm not a fan of this digital, over minimalism of saying no to technology, turning off the internet. The internet is amazing. Technology is a miracle. We just need something in between complete immersion and complete rejection, a middle path of moderation. And that's, to me, what a second brain is.
And is that where code comes in? I mean, this idea of there's so much information out there. And I think your book does such a good job of saying you can use it. You don't have to use all of it. You don't have to organize all of it. But boy, there are some real gems that you might need a year from now. Do you feel like code helps us get from overload to more wisdom and the helpful use of that information?
I do. I mean, I'd say all the parts of my methodology and my of the second brain concept are geared towards that. Um, Code in particular is design, which is the very heart of my framework. The main chapters of the book are code: capture, organize, distill, express. I think what that's designed to do is counter the most common pitfall for people like us who are information hoarders. We love to clip things and save things and download things and read books and articles and learn for fun, right? We are information hoarders. I think there's nothing wrong with all that. But for people who want to actually put all that knowledge to use, they want to read a book and feel like, okay, I can actually do something different than I was doing before that actually has a different kind of impact. Code reframes what your second brain is from a storage system, this sort of like data dumpster where you just pour things in and it never comes out, into a production system. Things get inputted, capture, they get organized, they get distilled, and they get expressed. There's an output. There's a finished product, a story, a message, an actual product or service, a business, or an impact on someone's life, as in the nonprofit world, that actually goes outside of your systems and has an impact on something else. That's what code is for.
For any nonprofit leader out there who's ever done an annual report, a newsletter, you've done code. You've taken bits of information, you've organized it, you've kind of formed some kind of a narrative, and then you've shipped it out into the world. So for anybody who's thinking, this sounds so exotic, I don't know. I suspect there are nonprofit leaders who are already using code. They might just not have thought of it in that way.
Exactly. Everyone, this is inherent to what it means to be human. Do you write things down anywhere at any time? You are capturing. Do you ever sort things, put them in groups or categories, change the order in which they're presented? Everything from your grocery list to the dates on your calendar to your to-dos for the day to, some quotes from a book. Okay, that's organized. Do you ever process and kind of summarize your thoughts into like a key point, a key takeaway, a key action step? That's distill. Do you ever talk? It's hilarious to me. People will tell me, oh, I never get to the express step. I don't know what expression is about, as they're saying words with their mouth.
Yeah. So they're
So
using
it's
code.
really just, yeah, it's not about doing some radical new thing. It's just about looking at what you're already doing, the process by which you already turn information inputs, process and refine them into information outputs, which is basically what knowledge work is. That's what we're all doing every day. And to be slightly more intentional about it, slightly more clear on when you're going from one step to another, slightly more leveraged and systematic by using software to do some of the things that you're currently using your first brain for. That's it. It's really, it doesn't seem like it because it may not feel like you have a second brain, but it's really an incremental step to just leverage software and these systems that we all have access to in a slightly more strategic way.
I want to pivot and talk about note taking. And many nonprofit leaders, they're spending more time in meetings than they would like. And maybe they're jotting a few notes down. Maybe they're typing things. Maybe they're taking copious notes. I'm not sure. But I see a lot of sloppy note taking, myself included. So I'm looking at myself. And I think I mentioned to you before we went live, of all the things in the book that it's helped me to do, it's to be a little bit more intentional about how I take notes. And it doesn't mean that they're long notes per se, but in meetings, I'm really trying to be disciplined and yet gentle with that about capturing the things that are really important. So walk us through why it's so important to take thoughtful notes. And then perhaps you could give our nonprofit attendees of the summit some tips on how to do that even better.
Yeah, you're pointing to something so interesting, which is I think a big part of what I'm trying to do is just have people value their notes. It's amazing to me. Someone will, say be at a conference and jot down some notes from a session, a speaker. To me, think about everything that had to happen for that to happen. You had to hear about the conference. You had to take time off your normal routine. You had to travel there, maybe. You had to look through the agenda. You had to pick that session. You had to go to the session. You had to listen. You had to think. You had to process and reflect. It's practically a 1 in a billion chance that you will be in the right place in the right time to jot down. It might just be a few ideas from that session. And then in turn, those ideas, think about the impact they could have. Every monumental change, from a new policy that the government passes to an entire nonprofit that gets started, to a merger of two organizations, to hiring a key role, an executive director, every single one of those started somewhere down the line as just a little passing thought in someone's head, right? There's no other way for anything in the world to start. It was just, oh, what if we did that? And that was like the little pebble that starts rolling down the hill and starts becoming that snowball, right? And so you can't underestimate these little moments of just, oh, huh, wow, haven't thought of that. Oh, wow, it's surprising, interesting. Oh, that's just these little tiny little micro light bulb moments. You have to write them down and then just revisit them in some shape or form. Maybe none of the methods that I propose are right for you, right? Note taking is as personal as anything else in our lives, right? It's something that you have to customize for you. But I would encourage, so for people in the nonprofit space, I think often, and this is true in general, but even more so, it may be difficult to see that you are working on projects, right? Often you're part of cycles, budgeting cycles, decision-making cycles, review, auditing cycles, and you think, oh, I don't have projects. I'm not a project manager. We don't have launches or anything. You may think I don't have projects. You have projects. Everyone has even the most predictable cyclical professions have something that begins and ends. A meeting, a summit, recruiting a key hire. Now step back from that, the particularities, and just imagine you are a system for intaking information, packaging them into products, and sending them out. If that simple process can be a little bit faster, a little bit more efficient, a little bit more effective, that is how you start to radically transform your career, the trajectory of your organization, and ultimately the impact you make on people. It's inputs and outputs, it's projects. And that's why my whole kind of way of thinking about a second brain has to do with the more rapid, higher quality execution of projects.
So let's take that a little further. You talk about projects. I completely agree with you that I won't say everything is a project, but there are a lot more projects in our noggin than we give credit for. One of the projects that I always keep in my digital task manager is single task work and single task personal. And those aren't necessarily projects, but my brain just thinks, okay, that's a little one-off. I'm going to put it in that bucket. And I know exactly what it means and what to do with it. And when I review on Sunday night, I'm going to deal with it if it's not urgent. How about the ARA in para, and walk us through that? And I guess maybe a struggle of mine with building a second brain is, does para need to be replicated, duplicated in every place? So do I need to set up para in my task manager and in my Evernote, or is it sufficient just to have it in one place? That might be my one struggle point with building second brain.
Yes, good question. So I need to take a couple steps back. So part of this is my methodology is platform agnostic. And this is something that I think sets it apart. This isn't how to organize Evernote. It's not how to organize Notion. It's not how to organize Obsidian. We have an online course also called Building a Second Brain. We survey the students who come in as to what app they're using. And I think that we've had people use upward of 70 different apps.
Wow.
You can imagine,
Wow.
right? 70 different apps. So I'm proposing a universal organizing framework that can be used not just across 70 note-taking apps, but the average person uses at least several dozen different apps. Think about Google Docs, think about calendar apps, task managers, email apps, note-taking apps, file management apps. There's just so many that we use. You can't, there's never going to be one app to do everything. There never has been, never will be. So the answer to your question is yes, you have to, but another framing is you get to, you have the chance, you have the option of, instead of doing what most people do, which is use a different organizing method in each of those places. This is really what is crazy making. When you use a dozen different apps and have a dozen different ways of organizing information. Instead, use a dozen different apps, but have one way of organizing information, which, as you said, is para, just 4 categories. If you can create 4 folders in about 30 seconds, you can be using para, which are projects, areas, resources, and archives. And did you want to get into the 3 later of those letters?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So the first, the P in para is projects. And to me, that comes first because it's where you should be focusing. Okay, you should be focusing there because that's stuff that is time sensitive. Projects sometimes get completed in a matter of days. It's not something you just can get around whenever you want. You have to pay attention to it often. But as you said, not everything is a project. Some things are areas of responsibility, which is the first A. That's sort of these long-term aspects of your life that have no deadline, things like your health, your finances, your spouse, your kids, your car, your house. There's sort of just these things in your life that have to be managed. They have some sort of, standard of quality that you're trying to maintain, but no deadlines. And that's areas. Resources is sort of everything else. Stuff that is neither a project nor an area, but that your topics you're curious about, subjects you're learning, classes you're taking, quotes on interesting ideas you're saving. It's like miscellaneous kind of. And then the second A, the last letter, is archives, which is basically anything from the previous 3 categories that is no longer active. It's like the basement in your house. It's like the cold storage, where, let's say, when you finish your project, you don't want to delete any of that material. You have all these probably tons of files related to it. Don't delete it, but you also don't want it crowding your digital workspace and distracting you. Just stick it in the cold storage, the deep freeze. It'll be there if you ever need it in the future.
And is that deep freeze, cold storage, let's say an app like Evernote, is that, could that be translated to, I just leave it there and that's cold storage? I'm not deleting it, but I'm probably not going to refer to it again unless I need it. Is that a practical example of that?
Yeah, the implementation of this depends on the app. Like some apps like Evernote have folders. You can just move the folder. Others don't, such as the newer ones, Obsidian, Roam, Logseek. They're sort of graph-based, based on links. There's different ways of implementing this. I think the important principle is, when you sit down in your precious, precious time that you have to actually make progress on something, do you have a way of limiting, narrowing your attention to what is active, relevant, timely right now? Like, I actually just looked yesterday. This is kind of a good illustration. Across all my different projects, I only have 66 notes out of over 7,000 across my entire account.
Wow.
So most of the time, probably 60-70% of my attention, my bandwidth should not be spread out evenly over 7,000 notes. That's a recipe for just complete confusion. Instead, it's like 80-20. 80% of my attention should be on not even 20% of my notes, like 0.1% of my notes, which are like it's like the very frontier of what I'm pushing forward right now. And then the last 20% of my attention can be spent on everything else. That's the important principle.
I love that. And there are so many different apps out there. I use Evernote a lot, and I love how you can now in their dashboard make certain things that you're referring to more often more present, more easily present to you. So it's not like you have to go through all 7,000 to touch them and get access to them. So that's a real gift. Um, Before we let you go, I love the story of your father and how you say he was incredibly organized and incredibly creative. And I wonder if you could tell that story of just what he was like and how it might apply to those nonprofit leaders out there who are saying, I know I should be organized, but I'm so creative. I know I should be disciplined, but I'm so artistic. And because I think you do such a wonderful job of just showing, here's an example of how you can actually do both.
Yeah. Yeah. My dad has been and continues to be one of my biggest inspirations. Every time I sort of get lost, there's so much advice out there, so many guidelines, so many, tricks and tips to implement. I just ask what he did, because to me, he did the ultimates. He led a creative, inspired career over many decades of doing his most passionate art. He's a painter, and he raised 4 kids and did a good job in California. It's like, as an artist, not that to me is more amazing than any like win a Nobel Prize or whatever, is to have both, and I think that really speaks to maybe the biggest thing I learned from him, which is we're constantly put in one of two boxes. From the earliest days of school, are you a math person or are you an art person? Are you more analytical or are you more creative? Are you left brain or right brain? We live in this binary world we're always being sorted into one of these things. But I look at my dad, and he, through the life that he lives, he completely collapses that distinction. He's a professional painter, has been he always says since he was 4 years old and first put his fingers in finger paint. And he was like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing ever. And he still is doing it all these decades later. But he's also one of the most like rational, systematic, he studied math in college. And he's like, I remember this as a kid, he's like a lawyer. Like he'll just break down your argument across such logical steps. He really does both. He's both very private and introverted, and when he does his art, but he's also very social. He likes to travel and see other cultures, but he also just loves being home and he has this garden, this keyhole garden that he loves. And so I think what I just take away from that is you can have both. Don't allow any categories to define you. Don't think you have to like pick a script that's been written for you and just read it. Now, in the modern world, I'll connect this back to a second brain. It's hard to do this, right? To have the best of both worlds, whatever those worlds are. You need a tremendous source of leverage. You need to be able to accomplish a lot with a little. You need to be able to save time. You need to be able to honestly do more with less time than most other people. And to me, that's what a second brain is. It's just this extremely time-saving, efficiency-making system that I use to live a more full, rich life than I would be able to otherwise.
Not a bad endorsement, not a bad way of looking at it. And I think a lot of nonprofit leaders would agree. They're trying to do more with less. So Tiago, thanks so much for being our guest in the summit this year. How can folks find out more about you and about Building a Second Brain?
Yeah, if you'd like to hear more, just check out buildingasecondbrain.com, where you can find the book, the course that I teach, the podcast, the blog. We have an abundance of resources about how to build a second brain, and you can take your pick.
All right. Well, we're going to do that. We'll make sure we recommend all those different resources to attendees. And again, thanks so much for being with us in this year's summit.
My pleasure, Mike. Thank you.